Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Now today I wanted to talk about something that's kind of viewed as one of the pinnacle achievements of old school RuneScape, and that is earning 1 billion GP. Now back in 2007, having a million GP to me was godly. I didn't know too many people who had that, but today things have kind of shifted to a point where 1 billion is kind of the de facto impressive amount. I mean, we have items that cost more than a billion GP in old school RuneScape, so it doesn't even end there by any means, but a billion is a nice solid amount and one that a lot of people can be proud of. Now the question I have today is, how do players become billionaires in old school RuneScape? Because it can seem pretty daunting for players who are lower level, or maybe haven't really unlocked high level money making methods. So today I wanted to talk about some of the paths that people take and how people speed up this process. Because the reality is that anybody can become a billionaire, it's just going to come down to how long it will take you. Now if Settled had decided to start tanning cowhides instead of making his Swampletics series, he would probably be a billionaire by now. It just takes time. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video, and let's get started. Now to begin with here, let's have a look at what are some of the more common routes that people take to become billionaires in old school RuneScape. Now I'm not going to mention everything here because there are hundreds of different ways to do this, but to give general categories here, first up is probably the most common one, and that is players who do PVM. Throughout RuneScape's history, PVM has been generally the highest GP per hour, and that is because the skill requirements are often much higher, and they require a lot more skill and focus often to actually complete. Now PVM can be broken up into a few different categories in old school RuneScape. We have the staple high-end bosses like Vorkath Zulrah, we have Slayer bosses like Cerberus or Hydra, there are God Wars bosses, we have high-end monsters which are pretty good GP per hour, there are wilderness bosses, and then after that there's a lot more lower level things, and then niche monsters that can be pretty good. Next over we have skilling, which recently has not been that good. Now besides a couple of very specific methods, skilling is generally going to be much less GP per hour than PVM and pretty much mostly everything else, but mainly because it's heavily botted and extremely AFK. Now there is of course PvP, and that can be a very good money making method for people who are skilled enough at it. There is merchanting, which is no secret one of my favorite methods to make money. Again, the GP per hour is going to be a bit harder to calculate. Then there are of course other methods that don't really fit into any of these categories. For example, opening up medium clue scrolls, swapping Deadman mode gold, leeching Barbarian Assault. There are other kind of meta methods that have come up throughout RuneScape's history that can be good GP per hour, but aren't exactly a game mechanic. Now let's circle back to the billion GP. So like I said, anyone can get it, it's just going to take a lot of time. If you're making 250k an hour, it's going to take you 4,000 hours, which is a lot of time, but that's still possible. I mean, people have spent 4,000 hours on accounts before easily. That said, you should be able to make way more than that. If you make 500k an hour, it's going to take 2,000 hours. If you can make 1 mil an hour, which is pretty doable for even somewhat new accounts, it'll only take you around 1,000 hours. If you make 2 mil an hour, it's going to take 500 hours. 4 mil an hour, you're going to cut it down to 250 hours. And if somehow you can make 10 mil an hour, it's only going to take you about 100 hours, which you could get done in probably a month. Now by looking at these numbers here, one thing that we can easily deduce is that increasing your GP per hour is going to be paramount. In most cases, that is going to be the best use of your time. For example, even if it took you 1,000 hours to better your account to get it to a state where you could earn 1 mil an hour versus the 250k you were making before, that is still by far going to be a better investment than just grinding down making 250k an hour for an eternity. Now that's an extreme example. There's no way in hell it would take you 1,000 hours to get a moneymaker that earns you 1 mil an hour, but just as a loose example. Now it seems pretty obvious, but beyond everything else, the best way to quicken the process is to invest into your account, invest in yourself, and invest in your future. Now with that said though, one really important piece of advice that I would give you is to pick something that you actually enjoy. A money-making method that you truly enjoy and don't mind grinding out hours upon hours is going to be a much more effective moneymaker than something that gives you a higher GP per hour but you hate. For example, personally, I really don't like Vorkath that much, as I find complete consistent GP per hour with not a lot of variance to be kind of boring. That said though, I really do enjoy Demonic Gorillas. I know I'm kind of weird that way, but even though Vorkath is a better GP per hour, I have done way more Demonic Gorillas and made way more money doing that because I can stick with it. Like, there are so many options here. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you enjoy it. Like, if you enjoy collecting monkey nuts and you can do that for 1,000 hours without breaking a sweat, then go ahead and do that. You're probably insane, but as long as you enjoy it, who cares? Now, I've avoided making a video on high-end moneymakers because I feel like there's so much debate on GP per hours and stuff like that, and what's the most efficient method, that I just assumed I'm gonna get flamed for making this video, yet I'm making it anyway, so I'm prepared for that. So with all that said, the GP per hours are just estimates. Things change a lot. For example, the GP per hour in raids 1 is going to vary quite a bit based on the price of stuff like the Twisted Bow. So with all that said, this is just a general estimate. So let's go through some of the high-end PVM moneymakers and see how long it would take you to get a billion GP using those methods. Now first up here we have Vorkath, which I've already stated is not my personal favorite method, but a lot of people like it, and it is the epitome of consistent money. I know a lot of people don't like the idea of having to rely on seldomly getting expensive drops to buff out their GP per hour, and if you're a person like that, I'd highly recommend doing something like Vorkath or Zulrah, or even the Alchemical Hydra. Now Vorkath and Zulrah are ideal in a way because they can be camped without a Slayer task, and they become extremely easy when you get proficient at it. Now the GP per hour for Vorkath is around 3.5 mil per hour, and the GP per hour on Zulrah is around 3 mil per hour, assuming you were doing it semi-efficiently. That means camping Vorkath to 1 billion GP would take you about 285 hours, and camping Zulrah would take you about 333 hours. So every extra couple hundred K an hour really does add up over time. Now one standout method that recently has become extremely good is the Corrupted Gauntlet. Now this moneymaker is so good right now because the Blade of Saldor is worth so much. Now recently they made it so that the Blade of Saldor is a non-degradable weapon, or at least you can create a non-degradable version of it. So if you don't mind relying on RNG, the average GP per hour here can be somewhere around 5 mil an hour if you are on drop rate, which means you'll be spending about 200 hours to get a billion GP, which is really not that bad. Now in a similar vein, we have the Chambers of Xeric, which again, you are going to be relying on RNG, getting some of those big drops eventually, or at least getting a split of them. Now the Chambers of Xeric is going to vary quite a bit on your setup, whether you're doing it solo, duo, trios, maybe you have some alts, but I'm just going to ballpark it at around 5 mil an hour, assuming that you are hitting the drop rate eventually for big ticket items like the Twisted Bow. And we also have the Theater of Blood, which as far as I'm aware is a bit better GP per hour at maybe 6 mil an hour, which means doing this method to one build is only going to take you 166 hours, which really is not that long. Now another really popular boss to kill in PVM are Slayer bosses, and I really like them because they add quite a bit of variance to your training, as a lot of them you can only kill when you have that specific task. So for example, we have Cerberus here, which can make you upwards of 3 mil an hour, which means it's only going to take you around 333 hours to get a bill. But as you can only do it on a Hellhound task, you can't actually grind that out indefinitely. We have Demonic Gorillas, which are actually 3 mil an hour right now because the Zenites are so expensive. Now for these, you don't really specifically need a task for them, but you might as well because Black Demon tasks are really common, and most people agree that you'll get your fair share of them just by doing the task. The Alchemical Hydra is actually such good GP per hour at around 4.5 mil, which far exceeds every other Slayer boss imaginable, and it would only take you around 222 hours of doing Hydra to get a billion GP. Again, you have to do it on task, so you can't actually do that directly. Now another really popular moneymaker is God Wars. Now there are 4 different bosses here. We got Bandos, Zamorak, Saradomin, and Armadillo. And the GP per hour here is going to vary based on the boss you kill, Bandos being on the higher end, closer to 3 mil an hour, and the rest of them kind of hovering around the 2 mil an hour mark. Now just to clarify here, this is not meant to be an in-depth guide, just a shallow look at all the potential endgame moneymakers you can look forward to getting eventually. Now on top of getting GP per hour here, you also can get experience, which is another reason why people really like PVM, because having a method that actually trains your account and makes you money is ideal. Back to the Monkey Nut example, even if that was 5 mil an hour, you really would not be progressing your account much, and that on its own is a lot less motivating. So most people would take the trade-off of making a bit less money per hour, yet getting experience, versus getting no experience and the highest GP rate possible. Okay, so that was a brief look at PVM. Now next up here, let's have a look at skilling. Now skilling really doesn't have too many competitive methods to it right now, but I'm going to highlight a few. Now again, the benefits of skilling are that the risk is usually much lower. The amount of time it takes to learn the method is very short compared to some of the higher end PVM bosses, like Raids 1, that's going to take you way more hours just to get good at, and they are very AFK. Now currently, I believe the best skilling money-making method per hour is actually pickpocketing elves. Now this method is extremely good right now, and I'll leave a link in the description to a guide on it by a YouTuber named Gnomonkey. I watched his video on the elf thieving money-making, and I can say I'm very impressed. Now the reason this method is so good is because of the enhanced teleport crystal drops that you can get from them, and if you're wearing a rogue's outfit, you know what, you get double drops, which means you're getting 2 times a 2.4 mil drop, which is ridiculous. Now luckily the enhanced teleport crystals also kind of held in place by, for one, the Blade of Saldor, because you're able to dismantle the teleport crystal into shards, which you can then use to charge your Blade of Saldor. So as long as that item is still in the meta to some degree, this method is still going to be extremely good. 3 mil an hour for skilling method is almost unheard of, and not to mention you are still getting a pretty significant amount of thieving experience. Now if you pickpocketed the elves all the way to 1 billion GP, it would take you about 333 hours. Now the next best method is crafting Wrath Runes, which brings you all the way down to 1.7 mil an hour, but will take you about 588 hours to get to 1 billion. You can craft double nature runes, which used to be a lot better, but now it's about 1.4 mil an hour. We have black Chinchampas, which are going to get you about 1.5 mil an hour. And surprisingly, actually pickpocketing Master Farmers is above a mil an hour at around 1.3 mil, and that's going to take you around 770 hours to get a billion GP. Now, I decided to throw in a couple of other money-making methods that didn't really fit into the PVM category or the skilling category, but they are still really good. First up here we have opening eclectic implings, which is actually upwards of 2.5 mil an hour. Now the reason this method is good is because of ranger boots, and you can get one on average every 10 hours or something. This method does require quite a bit of practice and setup for something that's not PVM, but it can be worth it, and it can be a lot of fun for a lot of people because you're just running around RuneScape, completing clue scrolls. However, you are really banking on ranger boots, otherwise you're losing money pretty much. We also have thieving ham storerooms, which essentially is just completing easy clues. A similar method that can get you actually 1 mil an hour. And one final kind of alternative method here is actually playing Deadman mode and swapping off the gold. I believe that anyone who maybe knows a bit what they're doing could easily make a couple 100 mil just in the first couple of days in Deadman mode, swapping the gold off and just taking that profit. So I think playing Deadman mode in the first day or two could be somewhere between 10 and 20 mil an hour, or even more, just depending on how lucky or smart you are. Now obviously that is a very time sensitive money making method, you can't do that all the time, but when it is around, it probably is by far the best money maker in the entire game. Okay, and finally here we have my personal favorite, and that is merchanting. Kind of hard to give an exact GP per hour, but that is how I made my billion, and it took me about 9 months. Now obviously not 9 months of game time, that would be ridiculous, but 9 months of actual time. Most of that was spent waiting for offers to come through. Flipping and merchanting is something that takes a lot of practice, but can pay off big time because the time investment once you're good at it versus the GP per hour or the GP you're getting back is very, very low. Like you could spend 10, 20, 30 minutes a day maximum checking offers and putting in flips, and that could net you millions of GP every day with barely any work. Personally though, with around 100 or 200 mil, and if I just sit down and start flipping it to GE, you could expect to make somewhere around 5 mil an hour if you know what you're doing, which means doing that directly would take you around 200 hours. 10 mil an hour is also definitely possible, although at that point you need much more capital, and you probably have close to a bill anyway, so it's kind of redundant at that point. Now, is flipping the best moneymaker out there? Possibly, it could be, but the reason I did it the entire way is because I enjoyed it. It was something that I could stick with, and I did it a bit every day, and after 9 months, I had a billion. Now, if you've tried flipping and you enjoy it, highly recommend going for that. If you enjoy killing Vorkath for one of the best consistent moneymakers in the game, do that. If you enjoy doing clue scrolls for money, I would recommend doing that. Like I said earlier, it's really going to come down to your personal preference and what you can stick with, and assuming you can find at least one of these methods you enjoy, you'll have a billion GP in a fairly short amount of time, and you will have enjoyed the process along the way, which is the most important part. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I always appreciate it if you leave the video a like, and I will see you next time.